wanted to talk today about fixing OKRs. OKRs, which stands for Objectives and Key Results, have become the latest management framework to suffer the fate of becoming way too popular too quickly. So at a lot of organizations, they're actually a theater, a charade, lipstick on a pig, whatever you want to call it, which means there's a lot of mechanics, but little useful substance or benefits, which is a shame because OKRs do have a huge potential if used effectively. So let's maybe start with the basics. What are OKRs even about? OKRs aim to help you execute effectively on what matters most, your strategy, while overcoming silos, politics, turf wars, and the ongoing grind in the organization. To face all of these challenges, OKRs provide alignment and focus, or a framework that enables alignment and focus. If you look at whatmatters.com that extends John Doerr's popular book on OKRs. OKRs are an alignment framework, a collaborative goal-setting methodology used by teams and individuals to set challenging, ambitious goals with measurable results. They are how you track progress, create alignment, and encourage engagement around measurable goals. So let's dive into some things that are important for OKRs and what might go wrong. One of the first things I see when working with organizations on OKRs is related to focus. OKRs should help you focus on your strategic priorities. If you're able to choose a small set of the strategic objectives that can reduce context switching and can provide a rallying cry. That rallying cry helps cut through silos and politics. I highly recommend reading Patrick Lencioni's Silos, Politics, and Turf Wars, which provides background for this. But choosing where to focus is hard. So a lot of organizations actually define an OKR for everything. And then when everything is important, nothing is really important. And that's exactly what we often see out there in the wild. So one of the first things to keep in mind is to avoid mapping everything that you're working on to OKRs and only focus on rallying around a few really strategic initiatives that you want to focus on. Another thing that relates to that is how organizations use OKRs to map to everything that they manage. OKRs are actually designed to focus on working on the business, changing, developing the business, growing the business, transforming the business rather than running the business. Running the business is what KPIs are for, key performance indicators. They can be used to keep operational work healthy and to manage stuff that is ongoing. And we keep OKRs for working on the business, for changing things, and actually for the biggest changes in how we want to do things. This distinction by itself can reduce dramatically the number of OKRs and make the whole OKR process much easier to manage and make much more sense. Another thing that you see while you do that is that the sort of work that we do need OKRs for, that development, growth, transformational work, typically involves more uncertainty around, do we really need to do this? Is this the really important thing? How would we drive this transformation? What's the best way to achieve the goal? Does the goal make sense? We might set out with some assumptions, some hypotheses. We want to validate those along the way, which leads us to the need to manage this sort of work differently than working in the business. This sort of development work requires empiricism or evidence-based management. We make an hypothesis and we try something. We try to close fast feedback loops around, is this working? Is this in the right direction? Does this make sense? Can we try something different? This sort of work also thrives with self-management and cross-functional collaboration, because when we don't know necessarily what's the right way to do things, we cannot design everything up front. We cannot figure out a perfect plan and then offload to people. It doesn't work well to play the relay race for this sort of work. Rugby or soccer is much better. We run across the field with a cross-functional interdisciplinary team from different areas in the business that pass the ball to each other and work on figuring out what's the best way to achieve a goal that is ambitious, that we have uncertainty around. This also leads us to the fact that OKRs work best when we rally around outcomes. In this sort of environment of uncertainty, it makes much more sense to set a desired outcome rather than managing outputs and activities, because we don't necessarily know what's the right activity in order to achieve our goal, and we want to unleash people's creativity and potential to work together to achieve a desired outcome. So a lot of organizations struggle with this because figuring out desired outcomes, and especially the KPIs that we would want to move the needle on to create effective key results, that's hard. It's much easier to continue to do what we've been doing until this point, which is to break big initiatives down into work, down into activities and maybe outputs. So a lot of organizations just default to that. It's worthwhile to keep trying to break big strategic goals into smaller intermediate outcomes. This is kind of similar to identifying minimum viable products, minimally marketable features. Product owners, agile practitioners are kind of familiar with this sort of practice of breaking big outcomes into smaller outcomes. So maybe get their help on that. Another thing that we see typically in organizations is that OKRs are used for the same sort of command and control structure in the organization rather than creating alignment and autonomy. When leaders extend OKRs to the whole organization, they often use strict cascading, which means that each level's goals is strictly aligned and actually a subset from the goals of the next level. Sometimes the form of a lower level's objective is the higher level's key result. That makes little sense because key results at the higher level would typically be quantitative, and we want the objective at the next level to be qualitative, to be focused on outcomes. So it makes much more sense to avoid strict cascading and actually use alignment and influence and informing the lower levels with what's important, and let the different teams in the organization come up with their own OKRs that don't need to be directly tied to the higher level OKRs, but need to be informed by them. One nice practice to make the connection is what Ben Lamort calls the why now, which is an additional description or additional data that comes along with an objective that you're setting that basically talks about why are we choosing to set this objective now. This might be a local reason in our context or something that relates to a wider strategy in the organization. This isn't anything new. Business writers talk about this, armies use this. Reinerson calls this aligned initiative. David Marquette talks about intent-based leadership. Henrik Nieberg maybe nailed it best in the Spotify aligned autonomy model that Jason Yipes also elaborates on, and I'll add the links to all of those in the description. Why does it matter so much? There are two main reasons. The most important one is we're doing creative work. We're doing work in an environment of uncertainty. The best solutions emerge from the people in the trenches. By providing them with a clear goal and then empowering them to take the initiative, we dramatically improve the chances of actually achieving the desired outcome. A secondary benefit is that people are intrinsically motivated by being empowered and provided with the right level of autonomy. So then the key is, on one hand, to provide alignment. On the other end, not make it too strict. Don't use strict cascading. Leaders should actually use OKRs to provide context and direction, to inform why rather than prescribe what and how. And then teams and groups should come up with their own OKRs and have a conversation with the wider organization about them. That conversation is important. It can help us reinforce what's important and just course even before we go and do something. This might seem like a complex process to pull off, but there are some patterns out there in the wild, for example, from agile ways of working for how to facilitate such a process. You can look at safe or big room planning for some ideas about how to run such an event. For example, last year I helped a biotech startup use this sort of process for cross-company OKR planning, which kind of relates to the cadence. A key aspect of evidence-based management and what we are trying to do with OKRs in an environment of uncertainty is the feedback loop. Many organizations set OKRs for the quarter and then forget about them until the end of the quarter. It's kind of like setting your sales quota and only checking back at the end of the quarter, which is not a recipe for success. The other extreme that organizations take is to micromanage OKRs to death. What we need to look for is the Goldilocks cadence. So frequent enough transparency or an opportunity to inspect and adapt, but on the other end, also quiet time, stable time for teams and groups to actually work towards achieving the OKRs without being micromanaged. So we want to let the teams focus and once in a while be able to inspect and adapt. So you need to come up with what's the cadence that makes sense. One example for how such a cadence could look like you can find in the Scrum framework, which talks about somewhere between a weekly to a monthly cadence of planning what to do towards the OKRs, reviewing where we are, and retrospective on how we're doing. And another benefit of that structure is that there's also a clear distinction between the team focused on working towards the OKR, whoever those people are, and the stakeholders that are interested in the success that should have an opportunity to provide feedback and drive inspection adaptation, but should also let the team focus. This relates to cross-functional alignment. A lot of organizations struggle to manage cross-functional collaboration and dependencies that are needed to drive the really strategic initiatives in the organization. This overhead makes it very tempting to use divide and conquer, to cascade the OKRs into focus, define OKRs for each function and group. That immediately turns it into output and activity focus because each one of these groups cannot really own cross-functional outcomes. By design, it's functional. The alternative is to actually use OKRs to think about how to organize. After you identified a few real OKRs for the organization, look at who's needed to really drive this OKR forward. And if that is a cross-functional interdisciplinary collaboration, maybe create an empowered cross-functional team to make that collaboration easier. That team could be temporary for a couple of months. If you see that there's ongoing need for work in the area that this OKR is on, maybe you can create a more stable team around this. The other benefit of creating such a team is that then the people working there have a clear business strategic goal, a clear quantifiable metric that they're empowered to have a direct impact on, which both helps them focus but also improves motivation. People really relate to a feeling of purpose. We know this is what we're moving the needle on. Another thing I often see in organizations is people that struggle with the relationship between OKRs and agile ways of working. They're unsure about what's the best way to relate OKRs to their backlogs, and they feel that there's a redundancy between agile and OKRs, especially when it comes to the cadence. Hopefully at this point, you can kind of see where I'm going with this. You can see that OKRs and agile ways of working are very similar, both based on focus, cross-functional collaboration, alignment, empowerment, and most importantly, empiricism. So how do we address the overlaps that are out there? So in some cases, OKRs map cleanly into existing teams, groups, maybe in a product development organization that already is using an agile way of working. And in that case, the OKRs can inform the creation of product backlog items or even In some cases, the product goal for a product development team that's new or existing that would focus just on this OKR. In both of these cases, how we're doing on our OKR should be a key topic to inspect and discuss and work on during our planning and review, and OKR should inform our decision making. There's no need in that case to add an additional OKR cadence within the quarter. Quarterly or so OKR review and planning can replace the sort of release planning, or can be the sort of release planning that organizations do, or be part of some sort of big room planning that the organization uses. One important thing is to make sure that when we're setting OKRs, we're involving the team and we're running some sort of dry run exercise to come up with realistic OKRs, ambitious but realistic. But there's actually a wider opportunity here. While Scrum was created as a framework for managing product development, it is actually appropriate for working on any complex problem. And OKRs are typically in a complex domain. There's some uncertainty around how to achieve them, and are they even relevant? So even when it's not product development work, it is development work. The product that we're focusing on is our organization. We're developing our organization for our work on OKRs. So maybe we can use an agile way of working, such as Scrum or others, for that other work as well. So to sum up, I hope I helped you see that OKRs and Agile Scrum aren't in conflict. It's actually the opposite. Looking at what we know from Agile and Scrum, the Agile principles, the principles of flow, empiricism, empowerment, continuous improvement can actually help us improve how we're doing OKRs. Implementing OKRs just at the mechanical level without understanding the principles behind OKRs, maybe through the eyes of agility, can fall flat. So to successfully leverage OKRs, you should be considering the following. Focus on working on the business rather than in the business. Stop starting, start finishing. Focus just on a few key strategic initiatives. Rally around outcomes rather than micromanage outputs and activities. Provide alignment and then enable initiative. Create empowered teams and groups that are organized around value, leveraging what's important. Consider using Agile and Scrum to execute on OKRs, whether it's in product development or any other area. When there's a team that is working towards something that requires some uncertainty, Scrum can be useful. And when in doubt, go back to the first principles of alignment, empowerment, focus, and empiricism. I talk much more about this in the PAL-EBM workshop, which basically explores the evidence-based management framework from scrum.org, which is also a great read and a great resource to help you improve the way you're doing with OKRs. I hope this was useful. Let me know in the comments what other questions you have about OKRs, how to fix them, how they interact with Agile. Have a great day.